Hello and welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. My name is Mark Hamilton, and joining me today, the one, the only, my friend, my neighbor, my colleague, my frenemy, Mr. Mark Daly. Mr. Daly, how the heck are you, buddy?
I'm good. I'm going to be totally the frenemy today. I know I didn't tell you that you could go ahead and intro the show, so I'm not editing out that chuckle because how can we not start the show on such a jolly note?
Purely
Because we
authentic.
know we
So
know the
authentic.
people love happy Mark Hamilton, so I'm
Dude,
not going to take that away from the people.
I'm so happy. So let me tell you a story. So again, our
Okay.
listeners are dropping off by the droves, but a couple of weeks ago, and I think I told everyone that on January 28th, we're doing the 4.5 hour trip down to
Yep.
Portland, do the drive down, see an NBA game. My son's super excited, his first NBA experience. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I saw a contest on Twitter, a Toronto Raptors contest on Twitter. And to enter, you just had to send a photo of your family bonding over basketball. And I had this photo for
Cool.
my son's birthday party where he and I were wearing NBA jerseys. So I entered this contest. I get this email this morning that we've won this all expenses paid trip to Toronto to sit in one of the luxury boxes on January 21st to see the Raptors play the Boston Celtics. So on
Get out of
back-to-back
here. Are you
weekends, yeah, man,
serious?
totally. So on back-to-back
Wow.
weekends in January, we're going to be in Toronto one weekend to see the Raptors play the Celtics. And then the week after that, we're going to be in Portland to see the Raptors
That
play
is
the
so
Trailblazers.
cool, man.
So
That
that's
is
why
so cool.
that's
That is
why I'm in
so
a good
cool.
mood. But all of
I'm
that aside,
I'm
man,
just full of jealous envy right here. But at the same time, dude, that is amazing. That is very, very cool. I
I
mean, that's
very
going to
much
be
appreciate
such an
that.
incredible experience. And I know that you're a little guy who's crazy about like basketball. I mean, that's going to be something regardless of the age that he's at now. He'll remember that the rest of his life. That is fantastic. I'm so
Yeah,
happy to hear that. That
I'll
is
never let him forget
wonderful.
about it. And
Yeah.
what was I going to say? Oh, Toronto. By the way, Toronto, one of the greatest cities in the world. Not somewhere that I would usually plan to visit in the
In
middle of
January?
January. But if the Toronto Raptors and Dove Unilever, who was this contest sponsors,
Yeah.
if they're willing to send me, I am not going to turn down the trip. But dude, we woke this morning. We had a flurry of
Yep.
text messages from Mr. Tim Harani as he was about to break a big
Yes.
story that I'm going to
Yep.
tease, but I don't want to get into because we'll probably get there after the first break, kind of keep people around. But what a great way to wake up today. We were
Yeah.
alluding to this. We were speaking to the fact last show that the FIA was going to start accepting expressions of interest for new teams to join the grid. And boy, did that happen in a big way today. But I feel like we should leave that as a tease and kind of go through the laundry list of things that we typically do to open a show.
Well, talking about teases, like when you're in TO in a couple of weeks, are you going to chill at Drake's pad, or is that on, or is that to be determined?
Well, he's out of town, but he's going to leave us a
Okay.
key under the welcome mat by the pool
Sure.
house. So
Okay.
we'll just go in.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. Well, we'll have the run of the place. We'll have the run of place. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, or if you've never noticed, but Drake's
Yeah.
place was actually an Architectural Digest a couple of years ago. I
Yes.
still have the issue. Oh,
Amazing.
that
Amazing.
place is just fire, man. I would love to have been the surveyor, the builder, the contractor. I just would have loved to have been involved with that project in some way and been able to say, like, I was involved with the Drake Mansion in Forest Hills.
More to the point, I would much rather be the person with the financial muscle to be the owner
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
Drake Mansion, but
yeah.
at least I would have liked to be. Yeah, I'm the guy that dropped off something there. Just to, even it's like something completely irrelevant and completely unimportant. But
I
that's
was the
cool, man.
UPS driver. I dropped off his latest pair of kicks. But the other crazy thing too, dude, is like his house is huge. It has a full-size regulation basketball court in it. And I've always
Yep.
said, and I've always warned my wife that if we were to become multi-millionaires, I would do everything in my power to buy a Formula One car and have it housed in the house. Like there's a Formula One fan in Winnipeg actually that has an old Williams car in a
Wow.
room that was custom built in his mansion. But I would definitely having a wing, having a side pod, having a front wing, having a wheel as a coffee table. That's not enough for me. Even if it doesn't have the engine, I would want a previously used Formula One car in my house.
Yeah, the one person that's probably not enviable when it comes to like copying in most regards would be Bernie Ecclestone. But did he not have like a car in his office in some sort of like
Yeah,
big custom built case or something like that?
totally. I've seen the
Yeah.
photos float around. I've never been able to
Do you remember
verify that
which
it's
car it was, or
it
I
was a
don't
Ferrari,
remember.
right? I feel
I
like it was
think
a
so.
Ferrari. Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to be able to pull that off, but like I say, I mean, that's about the only thing I would like to emulate Bertie Ecclestone in. So there you go. Anyways, moving along to like you say the laundry list of things. Of course, this is the usual time for our race weekend promotion.
Boo, 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 boo.
TheRaceWeekend.com, and that is TheRacweeknd.com. Enter in our promotion code Scuderia Pod to receive 10% off. 54th birthday today for the one and only seven-time world champion, not Lewis Hamilton, but the one and only Michael Schumacher. 50 days until Drive to Survive Season 3 drops on Netflix. 61 days until the first Grand Prix of 2023. And if you're not subscribed to Lily Herman's Engine Failure newsletter, shame on you because you are missing out something each
Oh,
and every week,
today's
especially
today's was
today's
brilliant.
edition.
Was
Yes.
especially for you and I because we've worked in and we've been around the media, we've been credentialed, we've covered international sports and team sports, et cetera, et cetera. Today's issue was an absolute banger as she dissected the media landscape as it revolves around Formula One. I put up a tweet a little bit earlier today. If you haven't subscribed, I highly recommend you do. Again, hit her up our Twitter. There's a link there. You can subscribe. She also has a paid iteration available now, and I'm
Cool.
guilty of not having contributed yet, but I absolutely should do so because she put some serious work into these 5, 7, 10,000 word weekly engine failure newsletters, and they are amazing. And the other quick point here as well. Sam Cooper, famous, of course, from Planet F1. He's a writer, journalist over at Planet F1, which, of course, was popularized through Drive to Survive last year as they got quite a lot of exposure to that show. Sam Cooper is going to be joining me on Sunday morning. We're going to sit down and do the first interview series podcast of 2023. Probably get that one dropped Monday. So you've got an extra episode to keep you busy between this one and our weekly news show next week. And then finally, and I know you're very, very, very excited about this, but we revealed, this is public knowledge and anyone can find it on Reddit or Twitter. But we talked last show about the fact that 3 teams have already announced their dates. That is up to 4. AlphaTauri will be revealing their car on February 11th, Aston Martin February 13th, Ferrari on February 14th, and Alpine on, I think, February 16th. Although I wrote 6th, I think it is February 16th.
Yeah, you could be right there. I just want to jump in here for a sec, Hammy. Marshall just checked in on the YouTube live stream, despite it being half past midnight Eastern time. So appreciate Marshall checking in quite briefly. But he was just saying that there's a guy in TO has one of Senna's 1987 Lotus Hondas up on the wall in his mansion, and that's the one that's sort of that goldy yellow camel cigarette coloring. So that's pretty incredible to
History,
have that.
absolute
That is
history to have
history.
on your
Yeah.
wall.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I always thought that was an interesting color for a car. I mean, it's not really gold, it's not really yellow. It was a very, very unique color scheme, and it's sort of like the navy blue decals all over the place. That would be very, very cool. A very iconic car. All right, moving along. As usual, you've dug up a very cool stat to share with everyone, and this is from F1 Stats Guru, and this is the lowest and highest pole-to-win conversion rates based on a minimum of 10 poles. So we'll start on the lowest side, which includes a roster of drivers, including Rene Arnoux, David Coulthard, Nelson Piquet, Ronnie Peterson, Charles Leclerc, and Juan Pablo Montoya. So Rene Arnoux had the lowest pole to win conversion rates at 11.11%. Coulthard's was 16.67%. Nelson Piquet, despite being a multiple world champion, had 20.83% in his pole to win conversion rates. Ronnie Peterson, 21.43. Charles Leclerc, not getting that one out easy this evening. Charles Leclerc, despite being one of the hottest young properties in Formula One over the past several years, has only been able to convert 22% of his poles to wins, and Juan Pablo Montoya just slightly better at 23.08. Now, on the flip side, the highest of conversion rates includes Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Alberto Ascari, and Max Verstappen. So some pretty impressive names. That's a pretty elite and exclusive club of Formula One drivers. Anyways,
Max at
LM,
75%.
I know, isn't that crazy?
75% pole to
Well,
win conversion ratio.
but I mean, he's miles ahead of everyone else. So let's just set it up and work from
Do it,
bottom
do
to
it.
top. Alain Prost, 54.5%. Michael Schumacher, 58.8%. Lewis at 59.2%. Fernando, 63.6%. That's an incredible number right there for Fernando. The one, the only, the great Alberto Ascari, his pull to win ratio was 64.3%, but Max Verstappen at 75%. That is mind blowing. I mean, that's, you see those guys in the middle that are somewhat kind of like compressed. You go like Schumi to Ascari, we have like 6-7% between them, but Max, that much further ahead of everyone else. That is just wow. That's all I can say. That's just that's amazing. Okay, going on to listener questions now. First of all, we have one, and this one is for you. This is from Ali. Hey guys, question for Hammy. Did you have any success getting your money back after the Vancouver Formula E race was canceled? Great job with the show. I tune in every single week from Iraq. Wow, that's cool. Checking in all the way from Iraq. Well, thank you very much for the question, Ali, and thank you for listening every week. That's the one thing I love about this show is that, we have people that check in from all four corners of the globe, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. Anyways, did you want to answer that question from
So the
Ali?
simple answer, by the way, first of all, thank you for listening. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for the support. No, absolutely not. And it's
Yeah.
incredibly frustrating. So to kind of back this up, for those of you that don't know, a couple of years ago, the FIA sanctioned a Formula E race in the city of Vancouver where we live. And the race was going to be hosted over Canada Day weekend. It was very exciting. People were super enthused about this. It was the first time we'd have like a major motorsports event in the city since Indy left back in 2004 was the last time I think we had a
Oh
car
man,
race.
has it been
Or a
that
champ
long?
car race.
Yeah,
So my wife
geez.
and I put down the $800. Our friends put down money. I have friends that spent $2,000 to $3,000 on tickets. And you and I were sitting here about a year ago and kind of off the air. We're like, we know where this race is supposed to happen, downtown on public roads. I don't see this happening. And ultimately, the race was pulled. The FIA basically got wind of how far they were behind in planning and development. They pulled the race. And then the city walked away and said, basically, the race organizers have no right to host this race, and we don't want to work with them again. But the problem is the FIA said, well, guess what? We're going to cancel this race. But the race organizers, who are the ones that collected the money for the tickets that they were selling kind of on our behalf, they'll refund your money. And they vanished from the face of the planet. So 30,000 plus ticket buyers have not had their money back. And the FIA just keeps pointing their fingers at the race organizers, and the race organizers have vanished. And what's really crazy about the race organizers is all the folks that have bought their tickets, they all bought them with credit cards. They're trying to press their credit cards in their banks for chargebacks because they basically paid for a service that was never rendered. But this company that's vanished off the face of the planet, they're fighting back saying the race was never canceled. It was only postponed. And therefore, we do not have to refund. So some people have had some success with their banks, but ultimately this phantom vapor ghost of a company that stole all this money is somehow still fighting back. The general consensus at this point is that the money's gone and no one's going to get their refunds. But for me, the frustration point is, as the FIA, you sanctioned this race. You presumably did your due diligence that people were buying tickets to a Formula E, an FIA Formula E event. Like, where's your accountability in this, man?
You would think so, right?
So yeah, we're not going to get our money back. We'd hope to use that money, parlay that money into a Formula One race this year. Without the $800, the $1,000, that's a non-starter for us. So yeah, just unfortunately, and I feel bad for all the motorsports fans in the city that got burned by the FIA.
Yeah, but was there not like a local law firm that had launched a
Yeah.
class action lawsuit on behalf of the ticket buyers?
Watching that
People
very
like yourself.
closely.
Has there been any development other than
Not yet.
were they trying to get people interested to join the
Exactly.
class action lawsuit? Okay, well I guess
Yep.
that's one of these things. Watch this space. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the question, Ali. Next one comes from Jason. With this variance of success of Red Bull versus AlphaTauri, can we put to rest that AlphaTauri is living off Red Bull's research? That's an interesting one. I mean, obviously they got the same power unit in the back of the car, but I feel that just from the fact that you have one of these teams based in Italy, the other one based in Milton Keynes in the United Kingdom, that there is some separation. But there was, that delta between these two teams has certainly excuse me, grown over the past year or so, I would suggest. I mean, they certainly, AlphaTauri, that is, certainly didn't have as good of a 2022 as they did as a 2021. What do you think, Amy?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm one of the biggest advocates for forcing a sale of the AlphaTauri team. I've said this so many times. Like, we have 10 teams in the world. Why are two teams owned by the same corporate governing body? It's absurd. And to be fair, like, if you look at the F1 or the FIA F1's 2022 parts categories, it's much more. There's far less. There's far less benefit to being effectively a B team on the grid in terms of the expertise and part sharing that can be passed down from one team to another. Ultimately, the biggest, most important component of the car, aside from the power unit, is, sorry, my mic kind of flipped around on me there, but the single most important component of the car, aside from the power unit, is the chassis. And for many years, the chassis have to be developed independently of one another. So it's not like Red Bull is passing down the chassis to AlphaTauri. They're having to develop that internally. Um, as far as listed team components and things like that, clearly they acquire whatever they can from Red Bull, or they use common shared suppliers for the other pieces. And obviously they're using the same Honda power unit. I think it's less about the expertise and componentry that's being passed from one team to another, but the perception of the team orders that may not so discreetly exist between the two teams, that, hey, if there's a moment where an AlphaTauri can do something on the track to aid a Red Bull driver, are they going to do that? And we know that in the heat of a race, Christian Horner cannot get on the horn or cannot deliver team orders to AlphaTauri. That's strictly prohibited. But there's absolutely nothing stopping those two guys from sitting down over coffee on a Friday and strategizing how things could play out on Sunday at a Grand Prix. And I'm not saying that has happened. I'm not saying it does happen, but there's nothing stopping it from happening. So the perception alone is damaging enough for F1. And as we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes, there's so many companies now that want to get into F1. This is an F1 in 2016 where the FIA and F1 were scrambling to find entrants to get onto the grid. This isn't 2010 when you had all the OEMs like BMW and Toyota and Honda exiting the sport. This is 2022, 23, when there's a host of suppliers and OEMs that want to be involved with the sport. So now's the time to make a switch. And to be fair, Red Bull could make a killing selling this team to Honda or to a different potential works maker.
Yeah, Mark, it's one of those things that regardless, until there's some corporate separation between Red Bull and AlphaTauri, I feel like this is going to be something that we talk about. Now we're getting some feedback. In the bike there. It was bizarre.
Sorry, buddy. I was having some technical issues there. As you were responding to my lengthy rant, I have these beautiful headphones, but they're touch sensitive. So if I so much as grace them, they go into a mode that I can't get them out of. So I apologize.
That's okay. That's all good. We'll tidy it up for the audio side. Okay, moving on to the next one, Mark. And there's a page break here in the show notes. So it goes from 1 to 3. So I don't know if there was something else in between.
So Jason had 4 great questions.
Oh, okay, cool.
Jason had 4 great questions, but I narrowed them down to the 2 that I thought we were competent enough to at least try and answer.
Okay, I just want to make sure I credited the right person in reading this one out. So anyways, Jason's next question is, Matteo Binotto may still be running Ferrari and probably should be, but the broken relationship with Leclerc was his undoing. Ferrari's hire is clearly geared towards appeasing Charles and probably at least partially orchestrated by his management. Great point. That is a really, really great point. I mean, as we were just talking about in that that previous segment here with that one polls to win ratio, Charles Leclerc, despite being one of the hottest drivers in Formula One at the moment and has been for several years, coming at like 22% for a pole to win ratio for a guy that's arguably driving for a top team, to me is a shocking stat, because he didn't record any of those pole positions, earn those pole positions in that single year that he was driving for Sauber, which obviously would have been under the supervision of Fred Vasseur, who is now the replacement for Mattia Binotto at Ferrari. So that's where Jason's going with this. But it's an ongoing thing. This just hasn't happened. But I mean, those stories that Charles and Mattia Binotto had not spoken to each other after Silverstone last July, I mean, that's just, I just don't know how that even works. It's just like, are they like standing there like in the garage, and Charles is on one side and Mattia's on another side, and Carlos is in the middle, and Mattia says, Carlos, tell Charles that we're going to be running plan A this weekend. And then Carlos says, Mattia says we're going to be going with plan A this week. And then Charles says, yes, Carlos, that's great. But could you tell Mattia that I really think we should go with plan B? And then Carlos says, Mattia, anyways, you get you get the picture. I just don't, it just seems so unbelievable and almost juvenile that relationship could be that fractured, that these two guys had not, reportedly had not spoken to each other in that amount of time. I mean, there was obviously friction and frustration. You could understand why Charles would be upset, but wow, I don't know. But I think
what it certainly does, it certainly speaks to, and this is, of all the different theories and kind of impressions that people have had of the Binotto exit from that team. And we also discovered that Ferrari was actively recruiting a new team principal last summer. So this wasn't a surprise. And
yeah.
as we discussed before, Binotto really jumped before he was pushed off the edge by resigning from this team. But I have to think, because sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, that his lack of a relationship that you just described with Charles Leclerc is probably a big part of this. And of course, Charles Leclerc coming to the end of that big 3-year deal, his management team may have been very clear. They may have gone directly to John Elkann and Vigna, the senior leadership at the Ferrari group, and basically said, look, you know what, we're not going to consider re-signing here if this is the gentleman that's still leading this organization. And I have to think that that's a big part of it. And we see this in sports everywhere. We see this in professional club football throughout Europe, and we certainly see it in North American professional sports, where star players are often able to leverage their star power and get general managers fired and head coaches fired. And I think this is no different. And obviously in this case, the hiring of the former Sauber team principal to take over the incredibly complex and massive project that is Ferrari was probably in no part due to the fact that he had a long-standing and healthy relationship with Charles Leclerc.
Yeah. The only person that can't pull that off and flex on that, that reputation and that, that position, that standing, is 2022 Cristiano Ronaldo. Well, Lionel Messi is getting all these accolades, winning the World Cup, and is arguably now a lock for the GOAT when it comes to soccer. Cristiano Ronaldo somewhat disappeared uneventfully.
Before we sign off for the end of the show, so at the very end of the show, and it'll also be like special extra content if anyone wants it. Can you explain to me what happened with Ronaldo at Manchester? Like at very end of the show.
Dude, I would love to, but you can't throw that on me. And also, like, I'm gonna jump ahead here in the show notes, because we're gonna try and have another crack at the whole Honda Red Bull thing. Like the whole the whole Ronaldo Man United thing is like the soccer equivalent of the Red Bull Honda Formula One exit. I'd love to. I just don't know if I've got the brain power or the IQ to explain both of them in one show.
Okay, we'll save that for a special podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, we probably need it. Anyways, yeah, just to wrap up Jason's question there, I think that absolutely that very much like you say, I think that there was a lot of influence with Charles and his management team with the senior brass at Ferrari. Anyways, I want to take a quick break here. We're going to come back on the flip side. Still a couple more emails to get to, a couple of questions. Then we're going to dive right into the news, and we're going to talk about Andretti Motorsports and what they are up to. And we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. As always, up to speed with Formula One. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton here. Next question comes from Samantha. Hi, Mark Squared. Huge fan of the show. I'm part of Gen DTS and proud of it. I went to my first Grand Prix last year in Austin and will be going to Miami in a few months. Oh my God, I'm really jealous about that. Anyway, Samantha goes on to say, I cannot get enough of motorsports. Are there any other championships that I should check out? I listen to you every day during my commute here in Dallas. Keep up the great work. Wow, Dallas checking in now. Coming from everywhere tonight. This is really cool. One thing I would love to go, maybe from Dallas or anywhere in North America, maybe Indianapolis isn't the most, far away exotic destination, but for me, that's like for motorsports, I've always wanted to go to the Indy 500. When it comes to Formula One, I've always wanted to go to Monza. That's definitely on my list. I'd also like to go to the Japanese Grand Prix. Like I've been to Fuji, but not for a race. I've love to go and watch a race at Suzuka. I mean, I'm in love with Japan and the culture and the history and everything. So to combine my love of the country and the people and just Japan in general, and combine that with the Japanese Grand Prix would be fantastic. I mean, some of the other ones, I don't know how spectator friendly it would be. I'd love to go and see the TT at the Isle of Man. I mean, that is just one of those wild and crazy things I think you just have to see in person, even though I don't really know if there's anywhere that you could really get a good vantage point. Anything rally related. About 20 years ago, when they were trying to get Rally Deutschland onto the circuit, they had like kind of a dry run the year before. And that's when I was living over in Europe, and some friends of mine and we went for a day because it was only like a 3 or 4 hour drive, and we went to go and check that out, and that was really cool, to get right up close to the cars, and probably somewhat dangerous. I don't know if you can still do the same at a rally race, but those are just a couple that immediately spring to mind. What about you, Hammy? What
Yeah,
recommendations do you have?
Samantha, love the question. I think if you're looking for a new championship, like an all new series to check out, I think I would be doing North American motorsports a disservice if I didn't say Indy. I think Indy is a great championship, and
Yeah,
I think the parity makes it a whole lot of fun. You've only got the two power unit manufacturers in Chevy and Honda, but the races are super unpredictable. You get a ton of
yep,
different winners every year, and you don't have repeat champions like you do so frequently in Formula One. And then the other one, and obviously I say this because it's my favorite championship of all, my favorite motorsport of all, but is MotoGP. Is I
yeah,
just believe the single best motorsports championship on the planet. This year, as we're going to talk about a little bit at the end of the show, I think is going to be a little bit more challenging because they're asking a lot of their fans with a 21 race calendar and a sprint race every single weekend, and they're certainly asking a lot of their riders. But it is, to me, the best pure racing series on the planet.
yeah. Another reason for me to go to India is that we actually have family that live about an hour away, and we haven't been down there to visit them, even though they come and visit us fairly regularly. So, I should be somewhat, somewhat, repay the you know, family kindness or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, cool. All right, next one going on to Layla. Thank you both for reading my question on the air last week. It meant so much to me that I have a follow up. A few days ago, the race posted a YouTube video about the Red Bull Honda conspiracy theory. According to Scott Mitchell Malm, the conspiracy circulating is this: Red Bull and Honda have gamed the system by getting an engine freeze agreed under false pretenses and are either reaping the rewards now or will later. As Mitchell Malm states, this conspiracy only quote unquote works if you honestly believe that Honda never had any intentions of leaving Formula One and never really did. Honda announced in 2020 that they were leaving Formula One, but are still very much here what are your thoughts? I love a conspiracy theory. Let me go and get my tinfoil hat, and then we'll dive into, like maybe the Apollo moon landing conspiracy. That if I don't want to talk about like the whole Ronaldo thing and this one, we should get into some fringier discussions like the alleged moon landing hoax, which it's kind of crazy. Anyways, yeah, this is an interesting one, right? And I think the whole crux of this discussion is just like Layla puts in her message there, that it really comes to the intentions of Honda. Did they really intend to leave Formula One and never really did? So that's for me, is that it? Did they ever leave or want to leave, or was it all just a sleight of hand? And we should maybe repost or throw that into our Twitter feed, because it's about a 10-minute video,
Yeah,
and
it's really
it's
good.
really interesting because you know Scott, he goes through everything, like this happened, that happened, and to believe this, and let's try and debunk that or look at it a different angle. It really, really is interesting, but it I don't know, and that really remains to be proved. I mean, we can kind of sit here on the outside and speculate about it, like what Honda's intentions are, but until that's proved or disproved, I don't know. I'm kind of still sitting on the fence about it, because we just don't have that insight. We're not sitting in the boardroom at Milton Keynes. We're not sitting in at Honda HQ in Tokyo, so we don't really know what was this, just a way to kind of find a loophole in the regs. And of course that's what the accusers will throw it towards Honda and Red Bull. So I don't know. I thought it was a very, very interesting video. I think it was very well researched. I thought it was very well presented, but I still find myself unconvinced either way. I hate to be a fence sitter in this case, but I just don't know where to take this one yet. I still don't, after all these months and probably years now, right?
Yeah, if you back this up to October 2020, Honda announced they were leaving Formula One, and in a way that was kind of going to leave, that was kind of going to leave Red Bull high and dry, because of course Honda was their power unit supplier, and Honda's commitment at that point, I think, was that, hey, we're going to supply you with engines for 2021, and then we're going to kind of walk away. And I think Red Bull was really frustrated or surprised or disappointed, because they felt that they and Honda had got that power unit in a really good place. And what everyone had been expecting at that point was that, hey, in 2025 or 2026, we were going to have a new power unit formula. And probably in 2023, we were going to have an engine freeze. And what Red Bull had managed to do was negotiate with the other teams to move that engine freeze up by a year. And the reason that worked really well for Red Bull was it meant that, hey, we have one more year with Honda. Honda's going to be here continuing to fine tune and develop that engine right up to the point of the freeze, which meant that they would go into that 2022, 3, 4, 5 period where engine development was effectively frozen with the most up to date modern iteration of that Honda power unit that they could possibly have. Now, if the engine freeze had happened in 2023, like it was originally planned, well, there would have been a year of a gap where all of a sudden Red Bull would have been rocking an engine that had 1 year of less development than everyone else on the grid, or they would have been forced back into the loving embrace of Renault, where they had no intention of ever wanting to go again. So the conspiracy, of course, is that Honda said they were exiting. Red Bull used that to negotiate with everyone to move back the engine freeze, which okay, everyone agreed to. Like they weren't strong armed into this, and then of course it parlayed into a whole bunch of additional benefits. Ultimately, I don't think there is a conspiracy, but I think the circumstances played out perfectly for Red Bull, because Red Bull was ultimately able to kind of keep Honda in the loop. And remember, there was a point where from 22 onwards, Red Bull powertrains were supposed to be building the power units using the IP and the blueprint provided by Honda, and Honda was supposed to be gone. And ultimately, that agreement transitioned into something different, which was HRC, Honda Racing Corporation, would continue to build the power units and continue to feed them to Red Bull right through to the end of 2025. And that's kind of where we are now. But now all of a sudden there's this question about, well, if Red Bull Powertrains is still using Honda engines now and the Honda stickers back on the car, did Honda really leave? And then furthermore, Red Bull is planning to enter as a new power unit constructor for 2026, which means they're going to get a ton of concessions, more dyno time, more money to spend on the development of that engine. Well, how much of their expertise are they lifting from the Honda units that they're using today? And are they really going to be a new engine supplier? And furthermore, if Honda comes back in 2026, independent of Red Bull, are they going to get concessions themselves as a new manufacturer when they never really left the sport? And all of this is upsetting a lot of people within the paddock, including Ferrari. And we'll kind of speak to that a little bit later. But I don't believe there's a grand conspiracy. I think things just happen to work out really, really well for Red Bull. And I don't think that Red Bull and Honda will be together in 26. I think Red Bull is going to develop that power unit on their own, and they're going to be able to sell the badge on that to Ford or Hyundai or some other OEM that wants to have some form of participation in the sport. But yeah, I don't think there's a grand conspiracy. But the video is great. It does a really great job of debunking the myths.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on, I just want to throw one other thing in here. Rocky in the live stream just threw in another destination for a motorsport possibility for that email from Samantha, the message from her. Anyways, Rocky says, I'd love to see the Goodwood Festival of Speed before hay bales are replaced with walls or horsepower is limited. So yeah, Goodwood Festival of Speed definitely would be a good one to go and check out. So thanks for that, Rocky, checking in from the beautiful state of Oregon. Okay, so now here we go, 35 minutes into this one. We throw the breaking news in, more than half an hour into the show when 95% of the people have already dropped off or fallen asleep. Anyways, so Andretti Global has now announced a partnership with GM Cadillac to pursue an opportunity to participate and race in the FIA Formula One World Championship. Hammy, this is big news, don't you think?
So big that we waited until 35 minutes into the show to talk about
I
it.
know.
But that is the ultimate tease. We're businessmen. We're podcasters and businessmen. We had to lure people in. But this is absolutely huge. And you know what? As people listening to this podcast know, nobody has been a bigger supporter and advocate of getting Andretti on the grid than me. Actually, that's total BS because I have been a huge Andretti naysayer. I've been hugely negative about their bid. But the one thing that I've always said is, look, if you want to be taken seriously by the FIA and possibly, and more importantly, if you want to be taken more seriously by F1, who ultimately needs to sign off on your admission to the championship as well, you need to bring something with you. And that something is a new manufacturer, a new OEM. And that is exactly what Michael Andretti and Andretti Global Motorsport have delivered today with the announcement that General Motors, one of the biggest global manufacturers on the planet, one of the biggest OEMs on the planet, are going to enter F1 under the Cadillac brand. And it's so funny because a couple of weeks ago, one of our really great listeners, and I'm not going to dox this person, but one of our really great listeners had reached out like, hey, look, I'm looking at getting an Audi. I'm looking at getting a Cadillac. And I was kind of like, I really like the Audi. I like the German brands. He was looking at BMW, but he ultimately decided to go with Cadillac. And he sent me a photo and it was a beautiful car. And I messaged him today. I'm like, man, you picked the right car because now Cadillac is going to be a part of this global motorsports party, along with Audi and along with presumably Honda and along with Renault and along with Ferrari and Mercedes. Like it's getting very OEM heavy, which is super exciting. The one thing that I would add that is very important to understand is that at least initially, GM will not be supplying power units. And I think Andretti probably still wants to enter the championship pre-2026. They've always targeted 2024. When they enter the championship, it is going to be with a power unit from another manufacturer. And it will probably be Renault, who Andretti has already previously announced that they would like to work with. And of course, Renault has no customer teams today, and technically they would be obligated to supply anyways, as long as Andretti was granted admission to the championship and they knocked on the door of the FIA. Renault's going to have to do that. But I think what's probably going to happen is, at least initially for the first couple of years, they will buy Renault power units and brand them as a GM power unit, possibly so that GM can entertain the idea of getting on the grid with their own power unit for 27. So there will be very little technical involvement from the beginning from a GM perspective in that power unit. But again, this is still very exciting. getting an OEM on the grid in any manner is super, super exciting. And you have to wonder what this does to Ford, because of course the rumors the last couple of months is that Ford wants to have some sort of commercial agreement with Red Bull. Red Bull is going to develop their own power unit, but Ford would love to stamp their badge on that power unit and have a Ford Red Bull powertrains power unit. Like that would be something they would love to have. And maybe they're going to be even more motivated to do that because their
Hmm.
large American global competitor, General Motors, has officially announced that they are going to submit an expression of interest along with Andretti Global to join Formula One. So this is huge, huge, huge news. And they've also announced, of course, that they want this to be an all-American team. They're obviously looking at drivers, and Michael Andretti was asked about his interest in bringing Colton Herta, and of course he mentioned that Colton's under contract to them through Indy, and that's probably likely going to be one of the drivers they would love to bring over. But very, very exciting. And I know our listeners have been huge, huge advocates and huge supporters of getting Andretti on the grid. And I think they're going to do for American motorsport what Haas never bothered to try doing, which is to represent American motorsports and the interests of American fans in a meaningful way.
And also, let's be fair too. I mean, there's very few people or groups in the United States. Well, I mean, there's plenty of groups that could, you know, I guess, field a Formula One team. But what I'm thinking is that there's probably very few people that have the pull and the influence to bring along a major global brand like General Motors, like the Andrettis. I mean, there's not too many people like the Andrettis out there. I'm sure there's plenty of people like Gene Haas that would like to field a Formula One team, but I mean, Andretti's certainly taking it to another level. So that's fascinating. It's going to be huge. It's a huge, huge announcement, and it's just funny because we just talked about on the last show with the recent tweet storm. Well, it wasn't really a tweet storm, but a series of tweets from FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, basically stated that they want to have this process for expressions of interest, and literally days after that, Andretti's like jumps all over it. When I saw the news this morning from our good friend Tim Hraney, I was just like, this is a big story today. Very, 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 very cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving along. So, okay, well, we're sticking with this one. So, Formula One says that the obviously Andretti entry still needs approval, and that, of course, will it's not necessarily a slam dunk, but certainly they've done everything that they can to get that entry approved. So it's going to be very, very interesting moving forward to see how that goes. Okay, moving along. This is a bit of well, obviously a very sad story here, but rally driver YouTube star Ken Block died several days ago in a snowmobile accident at the age of just 55. And that was, just really, really shocking. So in a statement released by Hoonigan Racing said, quote, Ken was a visionary, a pioneer, and an icon, and most importantly, a father and a husband. He will be incredibly missed. Please respect the family's privacy at this time while they grieve, end quote. So apparently it happened a couple of days ago when he was riding a snowmobile down a steep slope in Wasatch County, Utah. And apparently the snowmobile upended and landed on top of him. And he was later pronounced dead at the scene from injuries that he sustained. I mean, just incredibly sad, and what an incredibly talented driver. I mean, if you look at any of the stuff that Ken Block did, just crazy. Like after it happened, I just went and watched one of the posts that he had made. It wasn't all that long ago. I think it was maybe October or November, something that he'd set up on the strip in Vegas, and it was about 10 or 12 minutes long, and it was just cool. I mean, watching that, the way that he threw that car around, and just the situational awareness and the skill to be able to do what he did, just absolutely mind-blowing stuff. So incredibly sad to him. So
Super, super talented guy,
yeah,
competed in skateboarding, snowboarding, motocross.
yeah,
He competed at some of the highest levels of rallying and rallycross. He competed at the X Games. He was a co-founder of DC Shoes. And at some
yeah,
point he
yeah,
exited
yeah.
that business, but then he invested in his own business in Hoonigan Industries. And one of the things, and this isn't my personal thought, but I saw somebody else post about this recently. He did so much to mainstream and popularized motorsports through his Gymkhana racing series. So starting back in 2008, 2009, he started posting these beautifully choreographed stunt driving videos where he would take drift cars, whether they're Ford Fiestas or Subaru Impreza WRXs,
Yep.
through these incredibly challenging rallycross courses. And they were beautiful and they were well done and they had stunning production qualities, but they mainstreamed motorsports in a period where motorsports weren't typically mainstream outside of the US South, where NASCAR is big, and some pockets globally where F1 was big. So I think his contributions to motorsport need to be well respected. And the other story I tagged on here as well is one that I didn't actually know about, but when he was competing in rally, one of his major sponsors was Pirelli. And around the time that Pirelli joined Formula One, as Michelin and Bridgestone, Michelin, and some other manufacturers exited, they tried really hard to get him a Formula One test.
Yeah.
And curiously, they were apparently very close. He actually went to Toyota and did a seat fitting, but ultimately they couldn't proceed because he didn't fit in the car. And it wasn't because he was too tall, or it was that he was too big. It was just that the cars were designed for a couple of very, very small drivers. I think Jarno Trulli and I think
Yeah.
Timo Glock may have been the drivers back then. But ultimately, no matter what they did, his knees came up and prevented him from being able to move the steering wheel. So ever
Oh,
so close. We were ever so close to having a Ken Block test in a Formula One car, which would have been super, super cool. And apparently Pirelli continued to press for some time afterwards to try and make sure this could happen and try to get other manufacturers on board with making it a reality. But ultimately it was never to be. But yeah, very, very sad. And he leaves a family and a young teen daughter who was following in his footsteps, and most recently was building her own drift car, which I think had just been
yes.
finished a
Yeah.
couple of days ago, which is really
Yeah,
sad.
yeah, yeah. I did see something recently about that. We were talking about that work just before the holiday.
Aw.
That's what they're up to. Yeah, just really tragic. And Formula One world champion Jenson Button summed it up very nicely and very touchingly, saying, "Quote: In shock at the passing of Ken Block, such a talent that did so much for our sport. He was a true visionary with his own unique style and infectious smile. Our sport lost one of the best today, but more importantly, a great man." End quote. Yeah, very, very tragic. And obviously our condolences and thoughts go to the family of Ken Block. Okay, why don't let's take a quick break here, Hammy. We'll come back. We'll move along. This next one is something that we wanted to discuss, but we didn't get around to it last show. So we'll do that in just a moment. We'll be right back in just a few moments. So don't go away. All right, welcome back. So, Hammy, I'm going to let you take this one because you wanted to put it on the agenda last time, and then we forgot about it, or I forgot about it. But this was just the recent announcement that the FIA is going to ban drivers from making political statements without prior approval. So, anyways, why did you take it away? Because I know you're quite passionate about this one.
Yeah, so this is a topic that I've laid in bed many nights thinking about, and it's a very complex, and bear with me, it's a complex and fairly nuanced subject. But as Nate Saunders writes for ESPN, Formula One drivers will no longer be allowed to make political statements at race events without prior permission from the FIA. Motor racing's governing body has added a new article to its international sporting code that outlaws, quote unquote, the general making and display of political, religious, and personal statements or comments, notably in violation of the general principle of neutrality promoted by the FIA, unless permission is given beforehand. And he continues, in recent years, drivers have taken the opportunity to make statements before and after races. Since the start of the 2020 season, Lewis Hamilton's often worn t-shirts carrying political slogans or messages. After winning the 2020 Tuscan Grand Prix, he wore a t-shirt saying, "Arrest the cops who killed Breonna Taylor," on the front and say her name on the back. And of course, Sebastian Vettel has been reprimanded for wearing a t-shirt with pride colors and the phrase "Same Love" ahead of last year's Hungarian Grand Prix. And he and Hamilton have also worn pride colors on t-shirts and helmets at race events in the Middle East. And of course, last year at the Canadian Grand Prix, Sebastian Vettel also wore a shirt and a helmet design saying "Stop
Hmm.
mining tar sands, Canada's climate crime." So there's a couple ways to look at this, right? And I think right off the bat, I'm just going to share my opinion that I think this is deeply unfortunate. And I think for me, as a I like to think citizen of the globe who's been many places and tends to go many places and loves learning about people and culture, I'm also a big advocate for free speech, and I'm also a big advocate for people that have global platforms to leverage their platforms whenever possible to promote really worthy causes. And I think it's
Hmm.
unfortunate that the FIA, and of course, I'll be cautious here because I don't believe that the FAA is doing this of their own mandate, that this is something that is probably being encouraged by Liberty Media and probably being encouraged by the teams. I don't necessarily like that this is happening, but I think you also have to think about this through a couple of other lenses too, which is at the end of the day, they're leveraging their employer's platform to do this. So if I'm
Yeah.
Formula One, these drivers are you basically doing this on shift during their paid time, right? Like if they're doing it on a Saturday, if they're doing it on Sunday on a race day, well, that's paid time. And if the teams are cool with that and they support it, that's fantastic. But at the same time, maybe they don't, and maybe they haven't wanted to say anything. So it's a fairly nuanced subject. And I'll be very honest, like last year at the Canadian Grand Prix, when Sebastian Vettel showed up and he was wearing that Tar Sands t-shirt and that Tar Sands helmet, it pissed me off. It made me really mad because I'm a proud Canadian and I'm proud of our energy industry. And I think, ultimately the tar sands aren't necessarily the best way to extract oil from the earth. And it
Hmm.
is a very, very, very problematic way of creating energy. But at the same time, in the sense of global security, we're better off using tar sands oil than we are getting oil out of Russia. So I kind of see it from all these different perspectives. But ultimately, I'm just a big advocate for athletes having a platform and having a stage. But at the same time, if I'm the FIA and I'm the teams and I'm Liberty, do I want my message and my business product to be consistently hijacked? And I say hijacked, quote unquote. Do I want my product? Do I want my messaging? And do I want my programming to be hijacked by drivers whose messaging may not appeal to our audience and may conflict with our sponsors? And that's probably a big part of this as well. Like last year, you
Yeah.
and I talked about this when Sebastian Vettel showed up in Canada with that anti-tar sands messaging on. His helmet also bore the emblem of Aramco, which is arguably the biggest energy producer in the world. And they produce energy by drilling oil out of the ground. And there
Yep.
was some hypocrisy there. And all of that said, I do have immense respect for Sebastian Vettel. And to be honest, that was actually one of the takeaways that I had there, which is I can't sit here and be an advocate for the drivers using their platform to advocate for causes that are important to them and that get angry at one of them when his message isn't something I necessarily agree with, right? Like you either
Yeah.
have to be supportive of all the messages or you can't have any messages. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are getting angry with the FIA, and Will Buxton was absolutely railing on them on Twitter, which was nice to see because I don't think there's enough criticism of the governing body
Yep.
for issues like this, especially since he was so supportive of the FIA last year when it came to the jewelry ban. But I also don't believe it was the FIA that's necessarily mandating this, that I think this was a purview that came down from the teams and from Liberty, that they'd had enough. And they may have been hearing it from their sponsors, right? Like I'm sure that when that oil sands message was happening on Sebastian's helmet last year, I'm sure Saudi Aramco was putting in a call to Aston Martin and they were putting in a call to Liberty and the FIA saying, wait a minute, you know what, this is what we do and this is who we are. You can't have a driver advocating against the industry from which we extract wealth and we produce profit and that we operate in. So again, I've kind of rambled here. Again, my opinion is I
Yep.
like the drivers having a platform and I'm happy to have them having a platform. But at the same time, I also kind of get it from the business because Formula One at the end of the day is a business. It's a private business. And I think the last message that I would have on this too, because this is something that occurred to me when I was lying in bed the other night, was that these drivers will often advocate or protest or try to elicit a conversation about some of the places that we go. And I think that's good. And I like that elicits a conversation that I would sooner go and race in Saudi Arabia so we can all have a meaningful conversation about what that country is and what it stands for and who lives there and the opinions of the people there than just not go there at all. But at the same time, when it comes to some of these drivers, if you're going to meaningfully protest against the places that we're racing, you also can't cash your checks that are in large part being signed by racing in some of these places, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's funny too because when I first thought about this, the first thing that kind of like popped into my head was, "Oh, that's censorship, right?" You know, it's like
Right.
they're basically blocking them. But you know, as much as I respect Vettel and Lewis, and for the very important things that they did bring and highlight and showcase over the past couple of years, I agree with everything that you said, and I was also thinking that okay, so basically the issue is what you said right now is incongruent or conflicting messaging, right? And the Vettel
Totally.
and the oil
Totally.
sands one is the perfect example. And then I couldn't also help but feel that maybe that there was some also a bit of a proactive like measure to this, and not proactive in the fact that with the issue of Vettel and the tar sands and that conflicting messaging there. But I couldn't help but thinking that maybe at some point they're worried that somebody's going to come out and say something or support something very unpleasant or very, very controversial. And that, right now it's just like, to have like the Canada's climate crime and the tar sands thing, and then have like the Saudi Aramco patches on the same helmet that Vettel had. At Let's just put it's a PR awkwardness. It's inconvenient. It's very confusing messaging, but and I could see why that would be an issue for other people. And I mean, if Sebastian has that opinion, that's fine. That's his right to do so. But I couldn't help but think that perhaps they're concerned at some point somebody, and I'm not even going to speculate on what might be unpleasant, but maybe there's just some worry about that, and instead of say standing up like Lewis and Seb wearing pride colors in the Middle East and stuff like that, and I think that's fine, but at some point I think they could be worried that somebody might just say something that nobody except some very extreme fringe might agree with or something. So that might kind of be a bit of like worst case scenario. But maybe it's just like, if we let somebody say one thing, and as good as it is, and as worthy it is to let them wear pride colors, then like it's like if you let one thing go that is such, which should be like accepted and normal like everywhere in this day and age, it's just like, well, if we let that go, then we kind of have to let people say whatever they want, kind of thing. And maybe that's what they're afraid, is that they just like let it go too far, right?
Yeah, you make a really, really great point. And the first thing that sprung to mind was Nikita Mazepin. Nikita
Right.
Mazepin and his dad were promptly exited from the sport in no small part because I think F1 wanted them gone. And I think they were very uncomfortable with an oligarch so close to Putin being involved with the sport. And of course, the invasion of Ukraine was a convenient opportunity to exit them from the sport. But if
Yeah.
Nikita Mazepin was still racing, what's to say he wouldn't be advocating a pro Russia message on the grid, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would be in agreement with that. But how do you suffocate that form of freedom of speech and expression when you don't necessarily do it for others that people maybe do agree with? And
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
the reality too is we don't know. So the messaging here from the FIA in the internet, what was it? International Sporting Code, sorry, was that quote unquote the general making a display of political, religious, or personal statements or comments notably in violation of the general principle of neutrality promoted by the FIA are banned, blah, 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 unless permission is given beforehand. We also don't know how I would say broadly accepting the FIA is going to be, right? Like it could just be a rubber stamping process that, yeah, absolutely. Like we want to advocate for all these great causes and it
Mhm.
helps broaden the appeal of the sport and all those kind of things. It's rubber stamping. They maybe just don't want to be surprised when somebody shows up on the podium wearing a t-shirt for a message that they weren't aware was going to be advocated for. And to your point, like there could be fear that maybe somebody goes up there with a really offensive message that turns off 95% of the Formula One audience. And maybe they just want some overview of the messaging that's going to be shared.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
we
Because
don't
you'd
know
like to
that yet.
think that, like in this day and age, right? That if say Lewis wants to wear pride colors, that it's like, this is what I want to do, and they're like, yeah, okay, no problem, fine. It's something that doesn't even need really a second thought, right? But
Totally,
it's just,
totally.
I think that's a great point, that they don't want to be blindsided by something that like I say, maybe the best case scenario was maybe it's not even best case scenario, but the inconsistent messaging with the tar sands, and then like sponsors, right? Big oil sponsors, or something completely unpleasant that sort of comes out of nowhere, that everybody would be extremely offended by. So yeah, maybe that's just it. They just don't want to be blindsided by something that could be a bad look for everyone, right?
Totally. And I know it sounds like I'm waffling on this one a lot. And I knew that having this conversation today, there was going to be an awful lot of people that were very much in agreement and were very
Hmm.
much not in agreement. I didn't think that there was a need or an opportunity to address this. And I think ultimately some of the people paying the bills in Formula One, whether it's race sanctioning fees from race organizers or it's actual sponsors themselves, I think they probably pulled aside the leadership at Liberty and the FIA and said, look, you know what? Some of this messaging conflicts with who we are and what we do and what we believe in. And we're not comfortable pumping so much cash into Formula One if those messages are continuing to be shared from the drivers. And again, the other thought too, because I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today, and it was like, well, the drivers still have huge platforms outside of the paddock and outside of being on the podium. They have huge social media followings and they have
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube and they have all these other places where
How
they
many
can share.
followers would Lewis have on Instagram, for example? Millions, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, and he
yeah,
probably
yeah.
gets far more impressions from social media than he does from the race. So ultimately, I think this is a shame. I wish that the FIA and the Grand Prix Drivers Association partnered in on this and had a meaningful conversation about what this means rather than just kind of dictating down the law. And maybe collaboratively, they could have come up with some sort of consensus or some sort of compromise on what this means and what the process looks like to get messaging approved.
Mhm.
Because I get it. Like a lot of the things that these drivers advocate for that we might take for granted or might just take kind of like, hey, that's just the way it is in our society. I get it that some of these things aren't necessarily the norm or aren't part of the culture of some of the places that we race, but I still think there's value in having conversations about, hey, why isn't that the norm and why isn't this something that is supported or advocated for in certain places? And if we're going to have conversations about energy companies and the role of energy companies in the climate, let's have an open and meaningful conversation about Saudi Aramco and what are they doing or how are they shifting their power base to invest in renewables. And like when we go to a country like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, like we all hear and we all know the negatives about that country that have built up over the last 3 or 4 or 5 decades of really strict authoritarian rule. Let's have a conversation about what it means to go there and what life looks like for people on the ground. And is the country developing? And if it is, how
Mhm.
rapidly is it developing? And what are their cultural norms versus ours? Like, I want to be able to have conversations about all of these things. And I fear that simply banning the messages restricts our ability to have some of those conversations. But at the end of the day, let's be very honest. This is a business, and the sponsors and the race sanctioning fees pay these drivers' salaries.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you just have to kind of ask yourself, like, would that be if you walked into work wearing, a t-shirt, that was expressing your own personal beliefs. You work for a big corporation. Would they appreciate that, or tell you to, maybe rethink what you're wearing, or go home and change, right? Depending on what the messaging is. But anyways, yeah, it can be a difficult one to kind of talk about, because I don't, I don't want to feel like we're sitting on the fence, but it's a bit of a tricky one. But I kind of see it from all sides again, right? Anyhow,
Yeah, I feel like I've especially kind of sitting on the fence on this one because
yeah,
I've been such an advocate for so many of really all of the
yeah,
causes that
yeah, yeah.
these drivers talk about, and so I hope it doesn't come across that I'm in support of muzzling them. I just It's still a business, and I think we have to be very considerate of where the money is that's pumping into the sports, and the role that they maybe have in the decision making. But I also just want to be clear that I don't think the FIA is doing this in isolation. I think this is very much messaging that's
Yeah,
probably collectively coming from the teams and from
I
Formula One and
I
Liberty itself.
I can't help but think that perhaps it's just a way to avoid, like, inconvenient situations like the the Canada one, right?
Yeah.
Because let's just face it. I mean, most of the time you're going to get guys like Lewis and Seb standing up for and trying to express support for something, quite worthy and important, right? I mean, the Sebastian Tarsan's thing, that was, a little bit, it was confronting, right? I think that's the,
Yeah.
the word. But I mean, if there's somebody out there that intends to be a bad actor and put out a message that is offensive to a lot of people, they're not going to go through that process, the formal
Yeah.
process of approval. I mean, they're, if they want to go out and shock people, they're going to go and do it. I mean, they're not going to go through the process to do it. So it just, to me, it just, yeah, it, it's, yeah, I don't know. It's just another level of bureaucracy, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Anyways, let's.
I would
Yeah,
just
sorry.
add
Go
one
ahead.
more piece.
Sure.
I think we would love to hear the opinions of our audience, and
Yeah,
if you
100%.
have
Where do you
thoughts on
guys
this,
feel on it? Yeah.
yeah, flip us an email, slide us a DM. I think we would love to continue this conversation and not just kind of
Oh,
close the
definitely.
door
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
say, "Hey, we're open to having this conversation." We love opinions, and to be honest, I want to hear opinions from people everywhere, whether you're in Alabama or Texas or Alberta or Quebec or Ontario, Japan, the Middle East, the Gulf countries, Japan. Like, love to hear your opinion because this ruling may be interpreted very different. Because I think in some
Hmm.
countries, I think they feel like a lot of the messaging is kind of against them in some ways and challenges their cultural norms. And I think
Sure.
in other places, like, we just think this is all great messaging and that these are common sense things that we should all be talking about. But yeah, we'd love to hear the opinions of some folks. So slide us a DM, send us email, and we'll continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take one final break. Still got a bunch of stories to get to, and we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. And Mark, it doesn't matter to seem what we talk about. The topic always comes back to Ferrari one way or another. Anyhow, Ferrari recently were banned from a meeting of Formula One power suppliers because they have not formally announced their intention to be part of the 2026 rule cycle. And this comes via racingnews365.com. So there was a October 15th, 2022 deadline for power unit suppliers to register for 2026. That was extended to the end of November. It kind of had a very sort of fluid, kind of loosey goosey kind of feel to it, that deadline. But by the end of the original deadline, only Audi Formula Racing, along with Alpine SAS, Honda Racing Corporation, Mercedes AMG High Performance Powertrains, and Red Bull Powertrains had submitted their registrations by the second one. So the first deadline was only Audi. The rest came on for the end of November, because we talked about it at the time that it seemed a little bit odd that only one supplier had signed up at the time, but just seemed that the other ones, I think they just wanted some more time to kind of like digest and prepare things and get ready. But so anyways, it's a Ferrari that have not signed up in any shape, way, or form, and they've had some concerns about how Red Bull powertrains would be treated as a new supplier, having all this access to the Honda IP. But it's it kind of goes back a little bit to this the email from Layla that we were talking about at the beginning of the show. But it's the thing was, like, they were going to kind of take this thing, but then Honda basically said, you're not going to take this IP and use it as a basis to design and build your own engines from 2026 onward. So if you want to do that, you're basically on your own. So kind of like roundabout, we've come back to the same discussion that we had about like 40 minutes ago, and here we are again. But anyway, so the IP rights were returned unused to Honda by Red Bull Powertrains after it became more clear that the companies are going to go their own ways after 2025. So interesting that they would be excluded from this meeting. Mark, what do you think? Is this going to motivate Ferrari to, I would say, get their act together, but finally decide what they want to do?
And we all know to sign on, but I think the fact that they haven't is really
Yeah.
what you just described, right? It's almost a protest against the fact that they feel that Honda and Red Bull powertrains relationship is really problematic. Very much what we talked about earlier in the show in terms of that whole conspiracy theory, that things just seem to have been too convenient for both sides. That Honda exits, but they don't exit and they keep supplying engines. And Red Bull, meanwhile, benefits from the fact that they got that engine freeze a year early so they could have that fully stocked, fully equipped Honda power unit for the next 4 years. But in the meantime, they're also developing their engine while they also had in their possession the IP from Honda when they were supposed to build the power units that were actually being supplied from Tokyo. It's all very, very funny. So I feel like Ferrari's trying to make a statement here, but unless they've got some concrete evidence that there's some shenanigans happening between Honda and Red Bull, I don't think that this is any more than just a statement that they're trying to make publicly by their absence in these meetings. But ultimately, they're going to sign up because it's incumbent upon them to do so, and it would be what is the word? Disadvantageous. Is that a
I think
word?
that's a word. It is
Yeah, we'll go
now.
with
It
that.
is now
We'll
if it
go with that.
wasn't.
It would work against them not to participate in these meetings because these
Yeah.
meetings are really forging what that power unit's going to be, and their absence is not helpful to them if they have certain perspectives, opinions on how the new rule should be cemented.
Yeah, definitely. And sticking with the Ferrari, they are facing a $55 billion hole in their budget after a split from two of their premium sponsors. One was crypto company Velis, and then also Snapdragon, which were two very prominent sponsors on their cars last year. The Velis deal was worth rumored to be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million per year. So a source close to both of those companies said that Ferrari did not comply with the clauses that permitted Velis to create NFT images, and Velis said it had to be the financial. So they were in financial breach of the agreement. So there is, you know, apparently legal action pending on both sides here, and then the deal with Snapdragon apparently was just a mutual agreement to split ways. So there's going to be a statement coming shortly, but $55 billion, Hammy, that's a lot of money, even if you're Ferrari that already has all the money in the world, literally, to work
Oh,
with.
6 years ago, I would have said this would be a problem, but I don't think they're going to have any issues backfilling. I feel the Snapdragon deal was probably because Ferrari was probably asking too much, and Snapdragon had opportunities with other teams. In
Yeah.
terms of the NFT crypto piece, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, and I'll definitely be talking about it with Sam Cooper on Sunday. The sooner we scrape all of this crypto crap off of the F1 cars and get it into the history bin of time and get NFT out of the sport, the better. Like, to me, NFT and cryptos is a ugh, it's
Cryptos to me, Hammy, like it just feels seedier, dodgier than the
yeah,
whole .com thing from like 20 years ago. You know,
yeah.
it just feels less. It just feels so much, I don't even know what the word is. It doesn't have a good feel about it compared to like the .com boom bust from, early 2000s, right?
2022, yeah, 2000. Like, it's really dirty, and like you only
Yeah.
need to look as
Dirty. Yeah.
far
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
you only need to look as far as FTX and Mercedes. And
Exactly.
FTX, I won't go
Yeah.
into the kind of the details because I don't really totally understand them, even though finance is one of my things. But ultimately, that company goes belly up, and it was basically a huge mirage, and it was basically stealing billions of dollars from investors. But yet,
Yep.
for companies like Mercedes, were willing to sign up to deals worth tens of millions of dollars, as was Formula One themselves. Actually, they signed up to $100 million deal with FTX. Like,
Hmm.
they sign up to these deals, but they're not doing their due diligence. Like, if I'm Mercedes and I'm going to stick your logo on my car, like, I'm going to do a deep dive and I'm going to send auditors to your office because I want to make sure that you are what you say you are and you're not basically just a giant scam or fraud. And that's all, for all intents and
Yeah,
purposes, what FTX
but
was.
we've talked about this before, Hammy. I mean, surprisingly, Mercedes has not always done their due diligence when
Yeah, great
vetting
point.
sponsors, right? And
Great point.
which for me is shocking because Mercedes, like regardless if it's the racing team or the car company, that this is a premium luxury brand. I mean,
It's not
anything that
Haas. It's not Haas.
Precisely, and I mean, the thing is that anything that comes off that makes them look anything less than, perfect is a real black mark on them. So there's been a couple, I would say, rather significant, missteps in the way that they've had some sponsors or sponsorship deals and some of the names that have gone on the side of those cars. But it's not just a phenomena that's limited to them. I mean, they're all over, the cars on many, many different teams. And I echo those sentiments, Hammy. I think the whole, NFT, or sorry, not NFT thing, but the whole crypto thing, it's dodgy at, at the best of times. And I when you think about like that whole FTX scandal and just the amount of money that was, disappeared from investors to reappear in different places. I mean, that just it to say it doesn't sit well with me is just an understatement. That people lost vast amount of money, and then it shows up in other places like in sponsorship deals in Formula One. It just, like I say, to say it's it doesn't sit well with me is an understatement of vast proportions. Okay, so we'll move away from cryptos. Let's talk about something that's a little bit more, well, we've talked about a couple real heavy things. Now let's talk about something that's a little bit more fun to talk about, a little bit lighter. So Aston Martin boss Mike Crack says that their new factory will be a game changer. Now, Hammy, is this true, or is this just a phrase that gets thrown out there a little bit too much? I think that this is going to be a big deal for them. I mean, this is, to use another perhaps overused, phrase in Formula One, space age. But this is a fantastic facility that Aston Martin are going to be going into very
And
shortly.
it's desperately, desperately needed. It's important to remember that Aston Martin, for the most part, is still working out of the original Jordan factory that opened at Silverstone in 1991. And we
Wow.
often think of the early 90s as kind of being the glory area for F1 and there being a lot of tobacco money. But in terms of technological development investment, it's nothing compared to what we have today. And that Jordan factory that they've been working out of for the last X number of years is an absolute shoebox, an absolute shoebox. So this is going to give the organization a lot of room to breathe, and it's going to allow them to do a lot more research and development and part development and part construction within within their own confines and be less reliant on external contractors and things like that. So I think this is super exciting, super exciting.
Yeah, and something that's also super exciting is the recently retired Ross Brawn, who is most recently the managing director of motorsport for Formula One, and just a fellow that has an extremely impressive resume and list of accomplishments in the sport in many, many different roles. Says that despite the fact that he's stepping into retirement, his phone will always be on should Formula One need any of his help. So I think that that's important. But I mean, if anybody deserves to walk away and enjoy retirement after making the contributions to the sport that anyone has, I think it's Ross Brawn. As sad as would be to see him not involved in some capacity in one way or another. I mean, he's put decades of his life into the sport. I mean, it's time to let him enjoy life and and none of the pressures of Formula One that go along with it. Okay, so Alpine is suspecting bigger teams are hoarding staff under a budget cap loophole. Hammy, this is your kind of thing, budget caps and salary caps and things like that. So what's going on here? There you
It's
go.
an
I
interesting.
caught you. I caught you off guard, didn't I? I moved ahead in
No, no.
the show outline.
Oh no, it's all good. I was just readying for MotoGP corner because that's the most exciting part of my week when you let me talk about when you let me talk about MotoGP a little bit. But Jamie Woodhouse over at planetf1.com had written a really great article, and I'm just gonna quote from it here. But Alpine principal Otmar Snafnauer says the bigger teams, being Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, are finding interesting ways to position their staff in a way that uses gray areas in the cost cap. And the important takeaway here is we understand that while a lot of the smaller teams really had no impact in terms of their headcount, to get below the 145, 143, $140 million cost cap, the bigger teams being Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari actually had to cut significant personnel to be able to operate in that cost cap. Because of course the cost cap is basically all your operations minus some of your merchandising, some of your travel, some of your hospitality, your 3 highest paid employees, and your driver salaries. So that basically meant that anyone working in the factory, an engineer, a designer, somebody in the paint shop, they all count towards the cost cap. And for some of these bigger teams that maybe have 1,000 people, they had to start letting people go to get under the cost cap. And what we do know is that Ferrari, for instance, was able to strategically position some of their staff from Maranello into the Haas office that happens to be adjacent to Maranello, but some of these other teams had to let people go. And this was a boon for some of the smaller teams because they were able to recruit and staff up on some of these people. But what Otmar is indicating here are that some of the teams are doing some interesting accounting gymnastics to keep people working that maybe shouldn't be there under the cost cap. And I'm going to read the article here a little bit further from, of course, our good friend Jamie Woodhouse, but it reads, for 2021, the budget limit was set at 145, provisionally dropping to 140 in 22, while in 2023, the base limit will be 135. All 3 of those teams that were forced to slash their budgets, but at Alpine, little work was needed in relation to the personnel to settle at cost cap level. However, Snafnauer says the teams are no longer enjoying such advantage from their stability, as the past biggest spenders are now finding ways that they can use their staff and roles that will not push them towards an overspend. And he says, when everyone's the right size, you lose that. You lose that a little bit, said Snafnauer. What some of the other big teams are now doing is they're looking to exploit or have a better understanding of where those loopholes or some organizational changes you can make to actually stuff more people under that budget cap. They're looking at, yeah, I got rid of 100 people, but now I want to hire back because under the budget cap, I was able to find spots for them where they either didn't count as a whole person or they do some marketing stuff or whatever it is, in brackets here, that doesn't count towards the cop, or they work on a boat for some of the time. We're not there yet. I think they're already, and that advantage of being right at the beginning does dissipate. So basically what he's saying is the teams let a lot of people go, but they're now finding curious ways of recruiting them back and hiring them because they're classifying them in ways that doesn't count under the cap. So for instance, a team may hire somebody to work on a project unrelated to F1, while really they're working on a Formula One project and working on the car itself. So again, that's why the cost cap adjudication panel exists. And it's ultimately the role of FIA to sniff out these type of endeavors by the big teams. But we know how Formula One works, and the big teams, the wealthy teams, they're always going to push the boundaries of what's allowable as per all of the set regulations, whether it's the technical regulations or the sporting regulations.
Oh yeah, 100%. I was just kind of like joking to myself and thinking we were talking about, well, maybe they become like really creative in the way that they're accounting things like $7.8 million that they had for like a balance sheet item for like post-it notes, or like
Yeah.
$4.3 million like on photocopy paper, or like flowers or plants for the office or something like that. But yeah, certainly, I mean, they will always push the boundaries and try and
can
find
you
loopholes
can
that
you
they can.
imagine you're hired at an office as a cactus? Your role is to, you are on the books, you're a cactus,
You're a
but we
cactus.
need you working in the wind tunnel.
So what do you do? Do you get like some sort of like neoprene kind of like cactus costume or something?
Yep.
It's down there. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm a
So when
cactus.
the FIA comes to visit, you stand in the corner in a pot.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, we've seen weirder, well, maybe not weirder things, but we've seen creative ways to get
Yeah,
around the
yeah.
rules in Formula One in the past. Anyways, Hammy, I'm not going to stop the show here right now. You've been so patient with your MotoGP corner. So why did you do that right now before before I forget
Yeah,
and
yeah,
cut you
I'll
off
be
again?
super quick. I'll be super
You don't
quick.
have
And
to be.
I
You don't have
I
to be.
think I think by the way, I did send you the MotoGP jingle via email a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully we can get that loaded into the show because it's not MotoGP without the custom Hamilton produced MotoGP quarter. But just a couple of stories
Exactly.
this week. The first is that Marc Marquez is open to a whew, Honda exit if, and I quote, I don't have the tools to win a MotoGP title. So, of course, this is the team Honda that he entered MotoGP with in 2013. He won a title in 2013. He won the title there in 2014, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. He has been a powerhouse, and that Repsol Honda partnership has been exceptional. Of course, Honda has absolutely stood by his side the last couple of years as he suffered from, of course, that arm break and the rehabilitation and the multiple surgeries. And he acknowledges in this article that they have been fantastic and they've supported him as they should. He's a 6-time championship and he's been an absolute financial windfall for them. But he's also stating very clearly that if he doesn't feel that they can deliver a championship winning bike, he's open to exploring other opportunities, whether that's potentially with, and he doesn't say this is me kind of reading into that, but whether that's KTM or Ducati or any of the other teams on the grid. And then the other one is the MotoGP's CEO believes that Formula One's huge boom in popularity could help MotoGP. And as
Hmm.
much as I love MotoGP, I'll be the first to acknowledge that global interest in the sport outside of some developing markets is crashing. And a big reason for that is for the better part of 2 decades, the popularity of the sport really rose and fell on the presence of Valentino Rossi. That Rossi was such a huge, transcendent talent in this sport that he very much carried it on his back. And we talk about there being drive to survive converts, that people that came into Formula One because of drive to survive. I came into because of Valentino Rossi, and I loved his energy and his personality. And I was such a huge fan, and I loved every second of the 2015 and the 2016 championship. And I can relive all of the emotions having watched some of those races, including Malaysia at the end of 2015, and the fallout and all the issues with race control and the fact that he got like blah 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 blah. All of that to say, Formula One is crushing MotoGP from a popularity and a viewership perspective, and MotoGP is really struggling. So the chief, Carmelo Ezpeleta, believes that F1's popularity boom can also help Grand Prix motorcycle racing, stating that recently F1 was in trouble and we were the best of the best. And in my opinion, from a pure spectacle perspective, in terms of the quality of racing and the competitive balance and all those things, MotoGP is still the king, but you need more than great racing sometimes to be able to create a great product. And that means teams on the grid, that means exciting championships, and that means stars that can transcend the sport. And I think that's really where the sport is probably struggling right now, is that they've got some exceptionally talented riders, but they don't have a Valentino Rossi. And I think it's really hurt them the last couple of years, where the heir apparent to MotoGP, when Rossi retired and Marc Marquez, he suffered that injury and he spent the better part of 2 years on the sidelines. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch in 2023, where this championship's going to switch to a 21 race calendar, which is the longest that MotoGP's ever had. They're going to have a sprint race, a half points, half distance sprint race every single weekend. And of course, Marc Marquez should be back and fully healthy. And hopefully that Honda bike is really, really capable, because MotoGP needs a big season and they need to win back some of those fans, because attendance at some of the traditional venues, including Silverstone, has really crashed the last couple of years. So here's the MotoGP finding a way to regain some of the popularity it's lost over the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah, very, very interesting. What else do you have in MotoGP
That's
corners?
it.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, I give you the time and then you rush through it with a only one or two quick stories. You know, you use the time, my friend, but all good. We're coming to the end. It's just like it seems whatever we do to plan out a show, it always seems to come out at almost the exact same time each and every week. I don't know. I don't know how that happens, Hammy. It's just the built-in time scale factor, or whatever you want to call it, that we just have, between the two of us. Anyways, thank you all very much for tuning in again for the this week, Hammy. Before we go, why don't you remind everybody of
If you like what we do and you listen on Spotify, please give us a rating. It means the world to us. And if you listen on Apple and you'd like to give us a rating and a review, it means the world. I don't think we've seen one in a couple of weeks, which is, again, it was the holidays. People haven't been listening as much as they do. But if you'd like to give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, it means the world to us. And if you ever want to reach out with ideas or feedback, good or bad, just know that we're always open. And I had a couple of people reach out with some feedback about my opinions on COVID last week. And I think I'd made some comments about North America having reached herd immunity, which obviously isn't the case. I like to think we've moved beyond the pandemic stage and we're not there yet. So that was good, humbling feedback. But again, if you want to reach out, slide into our DM, send us an email at the skidderf1pod@gmail.com email. We're always eager to hear from our listeners, no matter where you are.
You know what? We did get one over the holiday here. I'm just going to read it. It's from Pigtail Ultra Runner in the USA. And their review is, I listen to a lot of F1 podcasts, and this is one of the only ones where I don't talk back. in quotes, yell at the host and never skip through sections or skip altogether. I love the flow of the podcast, and even when they get a little bit sidetracked, ooh, they know us pretty good here. We do get to, occasionally sidetracked. They pull it back quickly, informative and fun. Thanks. So that's awesome. Thank you very much. That came in on Boxing Day, so that was a nice late Christmas present for us. Anyways,
All right.
before we go, if you want to get in touch, you can slide into our DMs on Twitter at ScooteryF1Pod, or send us an email at scooteryf1pod@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for all of you in the chat on the live stream on YouTube. Guys, have a great weekend. We'll be back soon, and next time we'll be even closer to the car reveals and the start of the season and the latest drop of Drive to Survive, all that good stuff. Have a great weekend. Talk